Thank you everybody for joining. Today we're going to talk about the sound masking and what is the sound masking, how to get it. But let's start with the introduction of the team. My name is Mauro Barbieri. I'm field sales engineer at Biamp. With me we have Giulio.
Hello, welcome also from me. I'm Giulio Ferrari. I'm applications engineer, and welcome from the Biamp offices here in Italy. And today we also have our colleague, a special guest, Brett Minton. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Very well. Brett is a true expert on sound masking, so we are very proud to have Brett on board with us today. So let's start talking about sound masking fundamentals. So what is the sound masking, how it works? I start from some challenges, some issues that I'm sure you face sometimes in the workplace. So something that should be very common. And for example, starting with privacy. And this slide show a boardroom very close to a co-working space, a place where we have some workstation, a very thin wall behind, and maybe lack of isolation. So people outside the meeting room are able to listen what is happening inside the meeting room. This is not very good, and this is happening outside the meeting rooms. Could happen from room to room for the same reason, where the isolation from room to room is not enough. And of course, it happens in open plan offices where we have plenty of people talking and everyone is able to listen the conversation. There's another issue that we face very frequently, especially in open spaces, that is noise distraction. For the same reason, we have a lot of people working in the same space, and everyone is talking at the phone or very impromptu meetings, and so it is possible to listen to the other conversation. Very difficult to focus on our own job. So this is not very pleasant. And where this is happening in open plan offices, of course, in public areas, reception, so plenty of possibility to have this very bad issue. Also, we started from the corporate environment, but we can have the same challenges, privacy, noise distraction, in healthcare environment. For example, think about hospitals, pharmacies, or in retail banks, for example, in the courtroom. So plenty of scenarios where we have this privacy and noise distraction issue. So it's very common almost everywhere. How can we manage this acoustic issue? What are the tools? So let's start from the ABC of acoustic design. A stands for absorb. Absorb means to use material for absorbing the reflection and limit the reverberation in the space. Also, B stands for block, and means to use partitions and walls to get isolation from space to space. In this way, we limit especially the privacy issue. And the C stands for cover, and this is where sound masking comes into place, and this is helping to cover distant conversation, as we will see. There's another letter after the ABC. D stands for distance. You know that increasing the distance will reduce especially the privacy and noise distraction, because the sounds decrease with increase of the distance. It's very important also to observe what is happening as a trend in the workplaces. So we start having less ceiling tiles, for example, in favor of open industrial look, and this is limiting the one absorption surface that we have on the ceiling, for example. The same thing happened on the floor. We have less and less carpets. And again, we face rigid surfaces and reflection. Then it's in the new modern offices, sometimes we don't have the cubicles, so we don't have partitions between the people working very close, and so less isolation from people to people. Then we have plenty of glass walls, very nice, but no isolation. Also, there's another trend. Fortunately, we have very efficient HVAC system, very silent. This makes the workplace very quiet, and you know, when the workplace is really quiet, it's very easy to listen to distance conversation. So the trend is not helping to solve the challenge of privacy and noise distraction. Then this is in this slide we can see the physical the system, how it works. So we have a talker, the signal, so the voice level decrease with the increase of the distance, so 6 dB every time we double the distance. And then we have this wave on the floor that is representing the noise floor, and is a wave because it's not the same everywhere and not even constant in time, can change during the day. The difference between the signal, so the voice during a conversation, and the noise floor is the signal to noise ratio. The more signal to noise ratio we have, the better the intelligibility. So the better is the understanding of distance conversation. And is entirely due to this difference between the noise floor and the level of the signal. What is happening when we introduce this digital noise, the sound masking? So what is the sound masking? Sound masking is a digital noise that digital sound that we introduce and we broadcast in the environment. We raise the noise floor with uniformity, so you have the same noise everywhere in the environment. And the purpose is to decrease the signal to noise ratio. So when we decrease the signal to noise ratio, we have less intelligibility, and a certain distance that usually is around 5 meters, we have such a small signal to noise ratio that the conversation is no more intelligible. So this is how it works. And in this slide, you can see the radius of intelligibility. On the left, the pink area is without the sound masking. So it's very easy to understand conversation from distance. When we introduce the sound masking in the environment, we reduce this radius. So we reduce the distance where we have enough signal to noise ratio able to understand the conversation. So this is how sound masking works. How we can get the sound masking into our environment. We have mainly two possibilities. One is what we call direct sound masking. So we can install loudspeakers in the ceiling or in general. Even if we don't have a ceiling, we can use pendant mount, for example, and install on the top. This is directly firing this digital sound to the environment. Or we have indirect sound masking. With indirect sound masking, we have loudspeakers firing the sound to the ceiling that is reflecting down this sound masking and diffusing the sound masking into the environment. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of the two systems? With the direct sound masking, we have a very good control and uniformity, because control and uniformity depends on the position where we install the loudspeakers or emitters, as we call it. And then every ceiling is fine for this installation, because we install the system in a way to broadcast the digital sound versus the floor. and this includes the environment without any ceiling, thanks to the possibility to use pendant mounts, for example. We can install anytime, so not during the construction of the building, but after the construction of the building, if the necessity to reduce the intelligibility arise, we can install the sound masking system. And due to the high control, high quality of the direct emitters, we can also use the same system for paging and background music, so a lot of flexibility. The only side effect is that we have these visible speakers on the ceiling. On the other side, with indirect system, we can hide the speakers, so this is very good in some installation. It is cost efficient. We can have long strings of high impedance loudspeakers, so very good from the deployment point of view. But we need enough space, at least half a meter in the plenum for the installation, and especially it should be clean enough. And we can lose the uniformity compared to the direct system because of the ceiling that is just behind the indirect installation. And then mainly we can install this system during the construction. Otherwise, we need to remove all the ceiling, install the indirect loudspeakers, and reinstall the ceiling. So it's practical to create this system during building construction. Then the quality of the sound masking depends mainly on four aspects. The first one is the spectrum, so how is this digital sound that we broadcast, the level, very important, the zoning, as we will see later, and the uniformity. As I already said many times, the uniformity of this sound is key. The sound spectrum, this is not just any noise, it's not pink noise, white noise, is a proper sound, proper digital sound in the speech band, and arranged to be effective and discrete at the same time. And it sounds like air that comes from an HVAC system, so like air conditioning or something like that. So to be very effective, should have a proper spectrum. That's very, very important. It's a key point. Then the level needs to be strong enough for covering the conversation, so reducing, as we saw before, the signal to noise ratio, but not too much, otherwise becomes a noise, and we cannot work in that environment. So there's a proper level that usually is around 45 dB. Could be more in the public area, less in the private offices. And this is exactly what we control with the zoning. So every zone has a different use case and require a different level. So maybe, again, higher level in the open areas, lower level in the private offices, for example. And as you can see here, we didn't apply any sound masking in the conference room. The reason is that sometimes the sound masking conflicts with the conferencing system. So most of the time we don't have the sound masking inside the conference room, but outside for the protection of the privacy. Could happen that we need sound masking inside the conference room. And the reason sometimes is because we can hear the noise from outside, or maybe we have conference room one against the other, and we need to protect the privacy from one conference room to the other. In that case, we install sound masking event in the conference room with its own control, its own proper zoning, and in that way we can control the level to be good enough, but not too strong with to avoid the conflict with the conferencing system. And then uniformity. Uniformity, it's very important for many reasons. We cannot have dead spot or place where the sound masking is not working, or place where sound masking is too strong, and in general, the people moving in the area should not perceive any difference in the sound masking. So this is very important, as we will see later, this is entirely due to the geometry of the system. Okay, it's time now to talk about the QTX Biamp solution. So how we are able to introduce this digital sound, this sound masking into the environment. And so I switch to Giulio that will explain the system.
Thank you, Mauro. Yes, we've seen a few fundamental concepts of sound masking, and now we can see how we can translate this concept into products and see Biamp's offering for sound masking, which is basically the QTX product family. We have four different devices, QTX 300, 600, 800, and 805. As you can see, there's also a version with a D at the end, and following Biamp's naming convention, this means that in addition to the AVB media streams, these units can also support the Dante protocol. So it's the same as the 300, for example, the 300D, but also supporting the Dante protocols. We've learned just a moment ago that there are different types of sound masking. There can be direct field sound masking or indirect. And this is one big difference in the Biamp range of products. As you can see from the icons on the right, the QTX 300 and 600 are designed to support the direct field emitters, so direct sound masking. They can both control passive and active emitters, as we will see in a moment. The big difference here is the number of outputs. With the 300, we have 3 outputs. With the 600, we have 6 outputs. And then we have the 800 version, which is also supporting the indirect sound masking, so indirect loudspeakers. We have 8 amplified channels that are able to control 8 loudspeakers. So we can have a very good and precise control over every single loudspeaker. While its brother, the 805, is similar to the 800, but in addition, we have also 8 line level outputs to be able to control amplifiers and a line of high impedance speakers. So for larger installation or places where they have a bit more complex setup. All of these products share some common features. So we're gonna see the common feature and the difference between the different versions. So taking a look at the back of the units, we have the power supply, of course, and then we have 2 network ports. All of these devices can be used in a dual port or single port mode. With the dual port, we have the first one. The first port is dedicated to the media streams, so AVB or Dante in the D versions. And the second port is for control, so it can be connected to a network switch or to the network infrastructure within the company. Then we have a section in the middle part which is for control. We have 2 GPIOs connectors that are used either as inputs or outputs to trigger controls, for example, of the muting or the paging or controls that can be either input or output. Then we have, again, for control, 2 contacts that are used to mute the system when there's a paging going on or an emergency message. So in this case, the system is mute, all the zones are muted, and the message is can be heard clearly without the sound masking on. And then we have two controls for privacy signs. We can connect privacy panels that are informing the employees or the participants that there's some masking going on, so the working environment is protected with some masking, and everybody can be aware of this. Then all units have two analog inputs that can be either mic or line, and are used to feed the system with background music, for example, or a paging system. And this is basically where the common features between all the different models end. And we are taking a look here at the QTX 300, and we see three outputs, which is actually a couple of cable runs indicated as A and B, two RJ45 connectors per output. To this output, I can connect either active emitters or passive emitters. The only caveat is to connect the same type of emitter in the same output. So the two cable runs should have the same type, either active or passive. But I have three outputs, and it's worth mentioning that these don't really correspond necessarily to the zones. I can have, for example, two outputs that are connected to one zone. And so you could already see that the system can be very, very flexible. Last but not least, the QTX 300 has 12 uncorrelated independent sound masking generators. So the core feature of the unit is generating the sound for the sound masking. Why 12? We have three outputs, and to each output, four different streams are fed with different phases. And when I daisy chain a line of QT emitters, all emitters will receive a different signal of a different phase. So I can avoid the interference when placing the emitters one next to the other. So four different sources, three outputs. That means we have 12 independent sound masking generators. And following the same concept with the QTX 600, we have 6 outputs, again, 2 cable runs each. Each cable run can accommodate up to 50 active speakers or 60 passive emitters. And again, we have 24 in this case, because it's 6 outputs, so 4 by 6 is 24 sound masking generators. Taking a look at the QTX 800, we see that here we have on the right part 8 outputs, amplified outputs for low impedance speakers. As I was saying before, it's a way to control very specifically every single loudspeaker in the system. And we notice something that is unique to this model, to the 800, which is the PoE power over the network. This is because the 800 is designed to be installed in the plenum. We can see that it's certified for plenum installation, and it comes with plenum brackets included in the kit. So it's something that really can be installed in the plenum or near the plenum to be able to operate the loudspeakers. The 805 has the same type of outputs, but in addition, also 8 line outputs that can be connected to an amplifier and can be used with a line of high impedance speaker. So this is more a rack device, no PoE power here, that is able to connect a series or a long line of high impedance speaker where needed. The great thing about this system is that these are not independent units that need to be configured separately. First of all, they integrate very well with the Biamp ecosystem, so with the DSPs like the Zira, or with amplifiers, or with paging systems. But also, when I have a slightly complex installation, I don't need to configure every single QTX unit. I treat the whole system as one single system that can be configured and set up from a single point. This gives a lot of flexibility to the system and the setup, which is able to accommodate most architectural challenges and zoning within even complex installations. So very flexible system. For example, I can input a media source into a unit, and I can receive that input to other units that are connected in the system as well. So very, very flexible. I have a couple of units here that I want to show you on the video to show you the dimension and the form factor, which is very thin. And here, for example, we have the QTX 300. As we saw before, we have network ports, control ports, 2 analog inputs, and the 3 outputs. On the front, we have a very clean design and a small display here, which is very handy for installation, for the setup, because it's and maintenance, because it's giving us the IP address, the MAC address, the firmware version. But from here, I already have the first level of control on the system. We will see that we will be able to control the system from the web, from a web server that is on board, and from the QTX dedicated software. But already from here, I can already change the volume of the zones that are connected to the system, or, for example, mute them. So already first level of control. The same goes for the QTX X800, same interface, same display. And on the back here, we see the analog outputs, the amplified outputs to control 8 speakers. And mentioning speakers, we have an example of a passive emitter, a very tiny speaker. You can see the 2 RJ45 connection here, input and output, so I can daisy chain a long line of emitters. This is passive. This is the same, but with the active emitter. Active emitters are handy when I want to use background music or paging in addition to the sound masking. So sound masking and background music can be used at the same time when you have an active emitter. Then we have active emitters for the 800 and 805 line. So same concept, but for the bigger brothers of the family. The installation is really simple. It's just a locking system, so it can be installed facing downwards. As we saw this is for direct field application, so it needs to be placed on the ceiling facing downwards, and this will create the sound masking that is needed. One special application. This is an indirect speaker, but dedicated to very low profile. So when I have a low ceiling or floating floor, and I don't have much space, I can use this, which is actually 2 speakers mounted horizontally opposite. So I can create the needed indirect sound masking with just a very low profile system. Going back to the slide, we have a slide that summarizes the emitters and the speakers. The first 2, the QT passive and active emitters, are for the 300 and the 600 QTX products. Then the 1320 is the version of active emitters for the 800 family. Then we have loudspeaker for indirect sound masking, the 1357 and 1398, and the version for the 805, so the same speaker but with the high impedance speaker version. It's also worth mentioning that with QT emitters, there are a lot of different mounting options. Won't go into each of them, but it's important to understand that it's an easy installation, and regardless of the type of ceiling, if you have drywall, if you need a pendant mount, we have pendant mount. We have what we call a universal bracket that allows for many different type of installation. So there's a mounting solution for every installation need, and allowing the QT emitters to be installed in every space. With open ceiling areas, we also have the possibility with the 800 family to use Kubo loudspeakers, so Kubo 3 for low impedance and Kubo 3T for the 100 volts version. Again, another possibility to install the sound masking system when you have different type of ceiling applications needed. Very special application, the 2508 masker, when we need an additional layer of protection with sound masking. This is a self-adhesive product that can be put on a window or a wall or a door, and creates another barrier in addition to the rest, to protect even more the content of the meeting and the overall office environment for very sensitive collaboration. Okay, so we've seen the range of products. Now I will leave the floor to Brett for the explanation of some core design principles that can be useful when designing a sound masking system.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I do just want to take this moment to say that if some of the stuff is going a little too fast in our presentation, know that we've got hundreds and hundreds of articles in Cornerstone. We have self-paced training through QTX that's all free. It has some Avixa credits that are tied to it as well, if you're a part of Avixa. And the things that I'm going to talk about, my colleagues have already touched on very briefly, but the main things I'm going to talk about today are some of the whys, as you can see, but also some of the things that we need to be conscious of when we're starting to design, things that we should and shouldn't do in terms of moves, how we can be accommodating to the space. But as we go forward, the main questions that I ask myself are these four that you're seeing. Why is our speaker spacing and placement so important? Mauro touched on it at the beginning. Uniformity is always the end goal. We never want to have, he used the phrase dead spot. My team likes to use spot treatment, which is just a nice way of saying that if I have dead spots, my ear is going to notice if I walk from a masked space to a non-masked space. That's why we have strict guidelines. And I'm going to, you guys will have access to this presentation after it's done. So I apologize if I go too fast, because I do get excited about sound masking. But from that point of view, the placement of the speaker is extremely critical, because we know what the speaker can and can't do, or the emitter can and can't do. So we always stick with this within these parameters so that we can always deploy a successful sound masking system. Mauro also touched on the next topic, which is, why do we zone systems for the needs of the space rather than just the end user personal preference? This is probably the most asked about topic that I receive as the manager of the design team. Hey, why can't I combine open office and private office into one zone? And the answer is you can. After the commissioning is completed, you can virtually zone our system. I hope I'm not stealing some tread from later on in the presentation, but there are some things within our system that we can do, but we still want to have individual outputs for that granular control. And that's why it's really important, because we use a factor of 3 when we design. The architecture defines the zoning first, then the ceiling height, then the system functionality. So we had touched on it earlier in the presentation. Some speakers are good for masking, paging, and music, and some are only geared for masking. So if we have some of that functionality, sometimes we need to adjust and come up with creative ideas, which brings me to the next point. Why do I need to take ceiling obstacles and other obstructions into consideration when I design a system? We've already shown multiple examples of just a few of the speakers that we offer in our product line for masking, music, and paging. But we also need to be cognizant of aesthetics. We also need to be cognizant of most people that design systems typically don't realize that even with an indirect or direct speaker, the ceiling itself can be an unseen obstacle, such as using a fiberglass tile with an indirect speaker, or installing a direct field speaker above gypsum. Again, we touched on it earlier. We always want our direct field speaker to be obstruction free, just below lighting, HVAC, any ceiling materials, any sort of obstructions. So if that's not possible, or we have a speaker that needs to be surface mounted or wall mounted, we really need to take that into consideration, because most of the time that is what dictates our spacing, is where we can actually mount the speaker. And I'm going to touch on some more of these topics here in just a few minutes. But the last piece, we had also touched on it, but I just want to hammer it home. Why should we be cautious on installing sound masking inside conference rooms? VTC is very important, not only within Biamp, but also connecting our people with other people, right? So we always want to stay cognizant of, if a space is being used for conferencing, we don't want to interfere with that from both sides of the conversation, whether it's to or from, because we definitely don't want to hinder the listener to the talker space, but we also want to impede the unintended listener when the sound masking is effective properly. So for some reason it is, there we go. I'm using this slide here as a quick guide for our best practice spacing, and I can summarize this very quickly. The standard active emitters, both in our direct field line, have the same spacing, even though our active emitter has a different spectral uniformity, in terms of it can go farther down in the frequency band and it can go higher in the frequency band. We still keep it to the same spacing because they both have close to 170 degree dispersion. In saying that, in my top example, the most we can move to avoid an obstruction, because if you notice, you don't see any of the other neat items that can be a hindrance to the sound masking design: sprinklers, lighting, HVAC ducts, wireless access points. I can go on and on. But we have a 2-foot variance that we can move any speaker to make sure that we can avoid an obstruction. Now, there are going to be times where we have to push that out by a single emitter, and that's okay. We can tune around that. But if we had an entire row where we were hitting obstructions, we really have to go back as a group and see what a what a value add we can come up with, a creative solution to that. We rarely see it, and that's why I put the bottom example, because you see how I'm going from let's assume, counting on a 2x2 tile, I'm going from an 8x8 to a 8x10 array, so that I'm still within that 2-foot margin of being able to have uniformity, but I'm also allowing myself to miss lights, sprinkler heads, any other obstruction that we could see in the field, including bulkheads, things like that. I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we see in the ceiling. And I'm sure there's some techs in this audience that are just absolutely cackling over how little I'm showing in this item. But I just wanted to mention that we always want to stay with an aesthetic impact in a positive manner. So we don't want to try and put the emitter in the top right corner because you saw how small it was. It's handheld, so we definitely don't want to. We want to stay centered. We want to be in the center of tiles, so it looks as appealing as we possibly can. So we always have that in the back of our mind when we're designing for all of our dealers, integrators. So, and from there, I just wanted to provide this slide because I knew you guys had access to it. This is how my team designs the direct field emitters for enclosed spaces. So exam rooms, trying to touch all the verticals we had spoke about earlier, exam rooms in hospitals, private offices in corporate, any enclosed space, focus rooms, phone rooms, small conference rooms. These are the recommended layout, and you'll notice that we placed the door in a specific place, and we're trying to get the localization of the emitter away from the door. I just wanted to say that out loud. And also, if you notice the spacing guide in between needing a second and a third emitter or a third and a fourth emitter is 80 square feet. And that's where we, as a team, feel comfortable adding or subtracting an emitter in a space based on square footage. So if I didn't remember this table, or I didn't have access to it right away, I could take what the square footage is and divide by 80 if you want to remember that. So if I take 355, even if I look at my table, it's going to come back with a decimal somewhere close. I'm not going to be extremely accurate, but it's going to be 4.4 something. So I'm going to round that up to a fifth emitter, and hey, guess what? I'm within constraint of the table. So I just wanted you guys to have access to that, and I'm going to go into the open office spacing guideline as well. Again, this is just a reiteration of what I spoke about earlier. We've got 2 foot of minimum space, and we can also have 2 foot of a move for each individual emitter. So if I had a situation where I've got 2x4 tiles, or the only positive with solid surfaces is I can be within a constraint of that. So let's say I have a 9-foot ceiling and my lights are placed at 9.5 feet on center. That means that I don't have to necessarily go 8x8 or 10x10 to make that work. I can be within that constraint, and if I need to be 9 foot 8 inches away from a ceiling or away from an obstruction, then I can do that. Whereas opposed to if I'm in an ACT, I'm stuck on that 2 foot increment. But the main thing I want to point out here is if you have a ceiling that's higher than 14 feet, I would always ask that you use your Biamp resource. It doesn't, this table is pre-made for some internal and external use, but please always call a Biamp resource, whether it's your application engineer, your field sales engineer, or someone on my team to verify the spacing, because it could get a little hectic when you're going that high, and we have to have a conversation about how to commission that, how to tune it, properly to make sure, because as I said once before, and I'm going to say it again, uniformity is always the end goal. I love nothing more than to walk into a space that I've designed and I can't tell whether it's on or off. It makes me absolutely giddy with joy when I can't tell if the masking is on or off. But that being said, if I go to the next slide, it's going to look even more intricate because Mauro touched on it even earlier. The indirect sound masking system that we offer is not only harder to have uniformity, but it has a whole lot more obstruction and a whole lot more spacing indicators that can allow us to not only stretch our spacing, but allow us to ask more questions, gather more information, but we can also avoid obstructions easier by being above in the plenum space. But I wanted to mainly point out or give you guys this slide for one reason and one reason only. I wanted you to look at the difference between the mineral tile spacing and the fiberglass tile spacing. So whenever people fill out a PRAC or they're doing a site visit, they're looking at, hey, what can my spacing be? I noticed that I've got a 2x2 tile. Just taking a picture of it might not be sufficient enough, and we might actually have to do some digging, bring a ladder, maybe if they've got some laying on the ground, if we're in a retrofit or a new construction project, but actually looking at the manufacturer, verifying its STC, verifying that it's got a CAC, and getting that, because I can narrow down the design 10 times better by having that information up front and allowing myself to use the proper speaker with the proper mounting type and allow to say, hey, Brett, I'm about to install this. How high do I need to be? How low do I need to be? Oh, you have a 5-foot plenum? Great. You need to be 3.5 foot from the true deck. Bam, I can give you an answer. I can support you faster. But if I don't have that information, I have to make a guesstimate, and most of the time it turns out okay. Sometimes it doesn't, but I always, again, this is me giving tips and tricks on things to keep in mind while installing, and keeping up with why spacing is important. Because if I do find out that I have, because you don't have to do quick math here, but long story short, if I have a deep plenum and a fiberglass tile, I'm basically adding 25 to 50% of the amount of speakers needed for the same space, just because we know what a fiberglass tile does as opposed to what a mineral tile does not, and vice versa. So I just wanted you to have access to this. But my next slide is what I like to say is the properly color coordinated design of a perfect working sound masking system. All the things that we need to take into consideration, again, that same keyword that we always use, a uniform pattern, and use correct spacing. The reason that's important is I want to be able to transition from the blue zone to the red zone seamlessly without knowing that the masking is on or off. And doing so, the only way to do that is to stay with uniformity, keep within best practices, and stay within the proper speaker for the space. Now, there are some times where, hey, Brett, we have an indirect system, but now they want paging. We might be able to accommodate that, but we might not. And we need to have that conversation openly and, get the pros and cons of each. But until we have that information, we're just always going to assume that the architecture is first. And that's what dictates the speaker types that we use, right? So that brings to the second point. Granularity is also a key indicator in that, but for the most part, the architecture is really going to dictate. That's why we have a lot of speakers in our product line and emitters in our product line that can commingle between our controllers. If there's a personal preference from your end user or personal preference from your team to install and cable and all of that, we can commingle that, but we can also combine our controllers into one network system. And again, I'm not trying to step on the foot of my colleagues of what's next in the presentation. But from that standpoint, the last piece that I want to talk about for this slide is the color coordination that I'm showing should be dictated by the number of outputs. If my red zone takes 3 outputs, that's okay. But I don't want to combine red and blue on an output because they're going to be at separate levels and they're going to sound separate because of the enclosed to open space, or the transition space doesn't have enough to cover the signal to noise ratio, what Mauro had spoke about earlier. So we always want to be cognizant to extend wall-to-wall coverage, no dead spots. We want to always keep our occupants in mind when we install. So imagine yourself sitting in the space. Are you happy with what you would do? Or are you happy with your design based on what we can do? And we always try and strive to keep like with like. There are times when I want to say, hey, Brett, I want to page the yellow and the red area only. Okay, great. That's the functionality of the controller. We can handle that on with a different conversation. But if you said, hey, Brett, I need to save the $300 USD, so I'm going to combine the yellow and the red, I would discourage that unless we had a bigger reason than budget, because you're sacrificing the overall system, and we try to avoid that at all costs. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. And I've just got one more slide that I want to end on, and it's just some final thoughts to always have in mind. I say this every single day that I come into the office and work. Never hang emitters directly above obstructions, lights, HVAC, gypsum, plasterboard. I just want to keep that at everyone's forefront, because with our direct field speakers, if we have any sort of obstruction in the way, it's obviously going to obstruct the final ability of the system. So we always need to be cognizant of that, and we always should be designing for full uniformity of the system, from the front of all the way to the back of the warehouse, all the way to the front of the house, with the reception desk when you first walk in, right? So that and the architecture decides the speaker type. I just want to always continue to say that, hey, if you've got gypsum ceiling everywhere, indirect is not an option. It just can't be, because it won't produce the sound to go through that gypsum board well enough to be effective. So I wouldn't ever want to put myself in a situation for that. And we have a minimum of 6 inches, to where if I'm in that same red zone that I showed earlier, where I've got an open office, but let's say I have a cloud and a gypsum ceiling that are touching each other, but there's 8 inches difference, then I need 2 outputs for that to occur. If it's less than 6 inches, then I'm okay sharing that output. So the 6-inch rule for functional space is something we always live by here at Biamp. And the last piece is, please always reach out to Biamp, your Biamp resource for completing a sound masking design. We're always here to help. My team does global work. We've got people on our team that work around the clock, so use us. But I'm always happy to help. And the last piece that I have before passing it over is the same resources I talked at the very beginning. I'm sorry, did I accidentally lose my? There we go. I just wanted to since you guys have access to this, I just wanted you to have some landing pages for how to get a hold of my team if you need design assistance, maybe even as simple as design review. Hey, I've done a design. I don't know if I feel 100% comfortable with it. Here's my bill of material. What do you think? And we can we can have a conversation, we could give pointers, or we could just check off and say, hey, this is perfect. This is exactly what you need. And I wanted to add the things that I talked about. I said hundreds and hundreds of Cornerstone articles. They're there. And for you CAD and BIM Revit fans, we have a BIM library that's somewhat new. So I just wanted to put a landing page for that as well, so that you could download until your heart's content all the things that we have to offer in terms of controllers, background, items, other accessories. Anything that we offer in the Cambridge product line is in that BIM library. Thank you so much.
As Brett said, once again, I suggest to have a look at our support.biamp.com for all the technical articles, and also QTX has a very, very good manual full of information about all the details. So very important resources. I thank you again for attending this webinar. Many thanks to Brett for the very nice presentation, and I wish you a great day, and see you again on the next Biamp webinar. Thank you again.